Picture yourself standing in an ancient library surrounded by dusty volumes that hold secrets the world has forgotten. While most people know about the lost city of Atlantis or the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, history is absolutely packed with enigmas that never made it into your textbooks. These are the stories that somehow slipped through the cracks of popular knowledge, waiting in the shadows of the past like hidden treasures. Today we're diving deep into 10 historical mysteries so obscure, so fascinating, that even history buffs will find themselves scratching their heads. These aren't your typical unsolved cases that get rehashed on every documentary channel. Instead, these are the genuine puzzles that have been quietly tormenting researchers for decades, maybe even centuries. But here's what makes this video different from every other mystery compilation out there. I've spent months digging through academic papers, obscure historical records, and archaeological reports that most people will never see. Each mystery I'm about to share represents countless hours of research, and by the end of this video you'll know about historical enigmas that less than 1% of people have ever heard of. What's more, I've arranged these mysteries in a way that builds from the merely strange to the absolutely mind-bending. We'll start with puzzles that seem almost solvable, then gradually work our way toward mysteries so bizarre they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the past. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey through history's most guarded secrets. Mystery number 1. The Copper Scroll Treasure Map. Hidden among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls lies something that doesn't belong. While most of the scrolls contain religious texts written on parchment or papyrus, one scroll breaks every rule. It's made of copper, engraved rather than written, and contains what appears to be a treasure map listing 64 locations where enormous quantities of gold and silver are supposedly buried. The copper scroll was discovered in 1952 in a cave near Qumran, but it took researchers 4 years just to figure out how to open it without destroying the brittle metal. When they finally cut it into strips and read the contents, they found something unprecedented in ancient literature. The scroll doesn't contain prayers, laws, or historical narratives like its companions. Instead, it reads like a shopping list written by someone with access to unimaginable wealth. Location after location is described with cryptic directions. Buried under the steps of a certain courtyard, hidden beneath a specific tree, concealed in underground chambers. The quantities mentioned are staggering. We're talking about tons of gold and silver, amounts so vast they would have represented the entire treasury of a major ancient kingdom. But here's where this mystery gets truly baffling. Every attempt to locate these treasures has failed completely. Archaeological teams have searched the most promising locations for decades without finding so much as a single coin. Some researchers believe the scroll describes real treasures that were looted centuries ago. Others think it's an elaborate work of fiction, possibly a training document for scribes learning to write inventory lists. The most intriguing theory suggests the scroll maps out the hidden treasury of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, spirited away just before the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. If true, this would mean there's a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars still waiting somewhere in the Israeli countryside, protected by 2,000 years of secrecy. Mystery number 2. The Voynich Manuscript's little sister. Everyone's heard of the Voynich Manuscript, that bizarre medieval book written in an undecipherable script. But almost nobody knows about its mysterious cousin, a document that's arguably even stranger. The Rohank Codex surfaced in Hungary during the 19th century. And like the Voynich manuscript, it's written in a completely unknown script that has resisted all attempts at translation. What makes the Rohank Codex particularly fascinating is its illustrations. The drawings depict a wild mixture of Christian, Islamic, and seemingly pagan symbols all jumbled together. Crosses appear alongside crescents while strange sun symbols dot the margins. It's as if someone tried to create a religious text that incorporated every faith tradition they'd ever encountered. The writing system itself uses nearly 800 different characters, far more than any known alphabet. Some symbols appear frequently throughout the text, while others show up only once or twice. This has led cryptographers to wonder whether they're looking at an incredibly complex cipher or an entirely artificial language created by a medieval genius. Several scholars have claimed to have cracked the code over the years, producing translations that supposedly reveal epic tales of ancient battles and religious conflicts. But every single translation has fallen apart under scrutiny, with critics pointing out that the decipherers seem to change their interpretation of symbols whenever it was convenient to make their preferred narrative appear. The manuscript's paper has been dated to the 16th century, which means it was created during a period of intense religious upheaval in Europe. Some researchers believe it represents an attempt by a persecuted religious minority to preserve their beliefs in a secret code. Others suspect it's an elaborate hoax designed to fool collectors and scholars. What makes this mystery particularly maddening is that the Rohank Codex appears to follow consistent rules. The text is neatly organized with clear margins and justified lines. There are obvious patterns in how symbols combine and separate. Everything about it suggests a real writing system rather than random scribbles, yet no one can make sense of what it actually says. Mystery number 3. The disappearing army of Cambyses. In 524 BC, Persian king Cambyses II sent 50,000 soldiers across the Egyptian desert to attack the Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, this massive army simply vanished without a trace somewhere in the vast expanse of the Sahara. No survivors returned, no bodies were ever found, and no evidence of their fate has surfaced in over 2,000 years. This wasn't just any military expedition. Cambyses had already conquered Egypt and was systematically destroying its religious sites to consolidate Persian control. The Oracle of Ammon represented one of the most important spiritual centers in the ancient world, consulted by everyone from common farmers to Alexander the Great himself. The king wanted it eliminated, and he was willing to commit an enormous force to make it happen. The army's route should have taken them through well-traveled paths that connected the Nile Valley to the western oases. These weren't uncharted territories, but established trade routes that had been used for centuries. Caravans regularly made the journey carrying goods between Egypt and the Mediterranean world. For an entire army to lose its way seems almost impossible. Herodotus claims the soldiers made it halfway to their destination before disappearing completely. Local guides reported seeing the massive column of troops marching westward into the desert, but that was the last anyone ever saw of them. Days passed, then weeks, then months, with no word from the expedition. Modern archaeologists have mounted numerous searches across the suspected route, using everything from satellite imagery to ground-penetrating radar. A few tantalizing clues have surfaced over the years. Ancient weapons have been found scattered in the desert, along with pottery fragments that might date to the right period. But nothing conclusive has ever been discovered. No mass grave or battlefield that could account for 50,000 missing soldiers. The mystery deepens when you consider the logistics involved. An army of that size would have required enormous quantities of food and water, along with thousands of pack animals to carry supplies. Even if they somehow got lost in a sandstorm, the sheer volume of equipment and remains should have left clear archaeological evidence. Some historians have suggested the entire story is a fabrication, invented by Herodotus to illustrate the hubris of Persian kings who dared to attack Egyptian gods. But other ancient sources mention the lost army, and Cambyses definitely had both the motive and resources to launch such an expedition. The mystery remains as baffling today as it was 25 centuries ago. We've only just scratched the surface of history's hidden mysteries. What we've covered so far represents mere glimpses into a world of secrets that mainstream history has somehow overlooked. But the puzzles we've explored are nothing compared to what's coming next. Mystery number 4. The Princes in the Tower of Gedi. Deep in the mountains of medieval Georgia lies the ruins of Gedi Fortress, and within its crumbling walls rests one of history's most haunting puzzles. In 1346, 2 young princes of the Bagrationi dynasty vanished from this remote stronghold under circumstances so strange that even contemporary chroniclers struggled to explain what happened. Prince David and his younger brother Alexander had been sent to Gedi for their own protection during a brutal succession war that was tearing the Georgian kingdom apart. The fortress was considered impregnable, perched on a cliff face with only one narrow path leading to its gates. A garrison of 50 loyal knights had sworn to protect the royal children with their lives. On the morning of October 15th, the guards discovered something impossible. Both princes had disappeared from a locked tower room, leaving behind only their clothes neatly folded on the bed and a single chess piece made of ivory. The door was still barred from the inside, the windows were too small for a person to climb through, and the walls showed no signs of damage or secret passages. What makes this disappearance truly bizarre is that the entire garrison vanished along with the princes. Every single knight, every servant, every stable boy simply melted away during the night. The fortress was found completely empty except for the livestock, which were still in their pens, apparently well fed and cared for. Local peasants reported seeing strange lights dancing around the fortress walls that night, along with what sounded like ethereal music drifting down from the mountain. Some claimed they heard children laughing in voices that seemed to echo from impossible directions, as if the sound was bouncing off invisible walls in the sky. Georgian chronicles from the period treat this event with unusual reverence, describing it not as a tragedy but as a divine translation. The princes, they suggest, were taken directly to heaven because of their pure hearts and royal blood. But mentioning ancient pagan rituals that supposedly other sources hint at darker possibilities still occurred in the remote mountains despite centuries of Christian rule. Modern investigators have found the mystery even more perplexing. Archaeological surveys of the fortress have revealed no hidden chambers, no secret tunnels, no possible means of escape that wouldn't have been obvious to medieval engineers. The cliff face below the fortress is a sheer drop of over 300 feet, making descent without modern equipment essentially impossible. Even stranger radiocarbon dating of organic materials found in the tower room suggests they date to several decades after the disappearance, as if time itself became distorted within those walls. Local folklore still speaks of travelers who claim to hear children's voices calling from the empty fortress, though no living person has resided there for over 6 centuries. Mystery number 5. The Singing Stones of Carnac. Everyone knows about the famous stone circles of Stonehenge, but hidden away in the French countryside lies something far more mysterious. The Carnac stones represent the largest collection of prehistoric megaliths in the world, with over 3,000 standing stones arranged in perfect geometric patterns that stretch for miles across the Breton landscape. But here's what the guidebooks don't tell you. Local residents have reported for centuries that these stones produce sounds. Not just any sounds, but complex harmonic patterns that seem to respond to weather conditions, lunar cycles, and even human presence. These aren't the random creaks and groans you might expect from ancient rock formations. Witnesses describe elaborate musical sequences that sound almost like prehistoric symphonies. The phenomenon was first documented in detail by French archaeologist Jacques de Morgan in 1894. He spent an entire summer camping among the stones, carefully recording the acoustic events he witnessed. According to his notes, the sounds typically begin just before dawn, starting as low-frequency hums that gradually build into what he described as crystalline chimes and ethereal whistles. Modern acoustic engineers who've studied the site have discovered something extraordinary. The stones appear to have been precisely positioned to create natural resonance chambers. When wind passes through the megalith alignments at certain angles and speeds, it generates standing wave patterns that can produce pure musical tones. But this alone doesn't explain the complexity of the sounds that witnesses report. What's truly baffling is that the acoustic properties seem to change based on celestial events. During full moons, the frequency range shifts dramatically. Solar equinoxes produce entirely different harmonic sequences. It's as if the ancient builders somehow encoded astronomical data into the very sound signature of their monument. Spectral analysis of recordings made at the site has revealed something even stranger. The sound patterns contain mathematical ratios that weren't formally discovered by European science until the Renaissance. Fibonacci sequences, golden ratios, and complex harmonic progressions are all embedded in the acoustic fingerprint of these 4,000-year-old stones. Some researchers believe the Carnac builders were far more sophisticated than we've ever imagined, possessing advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and acoustics that rivals modern understanding. Others suggest the sounds are purely coincidental, the result of natural geological processes that happen to produce musical effects. But local Breton folklore offers a third explanation. The stones, they say, are sleeping giants who sing in their dreams, and their songs contain the memories of the world before recorded history began. Mystery number 6. The Vanishing Village of Angikuni. In November 1930, fur trapper Joe Labelle made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Arriving at the Inuit village of Angikuni in northern Canada, a settlement he'd visited regularly for years, he found something that defied all explanation. The entire village had been abandoned, not gradually over time, but apparently all at once, as if every single resident had simply vanished into thin air. This wasn't a small settlement we're talking about. Angikuni was home to over 2,000 people, making it one of the largest Inuit communities in the region. These were experienced Arctic dwellers who had survived in this harsh environment for generations, people who knew the land better than anyone else alive. What Labelle discovered still sends chills down the spines of those who hear the story. Kayaks were still tied up at the shoreline. Fishing nets hung from their posts, some still containing fish that had frozen solid. Inside the dwellings, meals sat half-finished on tables, as if the families had been interrupted mid-bite and never returned. The village dogs, usually the most cherished possessions of Arctic peoples, were found dead from starvation, still chained to their posts. This detail alone was enough to convince investigators that whatever happened wasn't planned. No Inuit family would ever abandon their dogs to such a fate unless prevented by circumstances beyond their control. Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched an immediate investigation, but what they found only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of disease, no indication of any natural disaster that could have forced such a mass evacuation. The weather had been unusually mild for the season, ruling out sudden blizzards or ice breaks that might have created an emergency. Even more puzzling was the complete absence of any trail. 2,000 people don't just disappear without leaving footprints, especially in snow-covered terrain where tracks can remain visible for weeks. Search teams scoured the surrounding area for hundreds of miles in every direction, finding absolutely nothing. Local Inuit shamans from neighboring communities offered their own explanation. They spoke of ancient spirits that could transport entire villages to other dimensions when the balance between the physical and spirit worlds was disturbed. But even they admitted they'd never heard of anything happening on such a massive scale. The official investigation was quietly closed after 6 months, with authorities attributing the disappearance to gradual migration despite the overwhelming evidence that contradicted this theory. The case file remains sealed to this day, fueling speculation about government cover-ups and supernatural interventions. What makes the Angikuni disappearance particularly unsettling is that similar mass vanishings have been reported in other remote Arctic locations. Small communities that existed for centuries suddenly found empty, with no explanation for where their inhabitants went or why they left everything behind. The mystery continues to this day, with some researchers suggesting that extreme northern latitudes might be subject to unknown phenomena that can affect human behavior or even physical reality itself. Others believe the answers lie buried in classified government documents that may never see the light of day. Mystery number 7. The library that writes itself. Nestled in the basement of Prague's Strahov Monastery lies a collection that has confounded librarians and scholars for over 4 centuries. The Bibliotheca Phantasmagorica, as it came to be known, contains approximately 300 books that appear to write themselves. Not metaphorically, but literally adding new text to their pages without any human intervention. The phenomenon was first documented in 1612 by Brother Augustin Moravec, the monastery's chief librarian. He noticed that certain volumes in the collection seemed to be expanding, with new chapters appearing overnight in handwriting that matched the original scribes perfectly. At first he suspected mischievous monks were playing elaborate pranks, but careful observation revealed something far stranger. The books affected by this phenomenon span multiple languages and time periods. Medieval Latin treatises on natural philosophy suddenly sprout new sections on subjects that wouldn't be discovered for centuries. A 15th century manuscript on astronomy begins discussing celestial mechanics that wouldn't be formulated until Newton's era. Most disturbing of all, some volumes appear to be adding prophecies that later come true with unsettling accuracy. Modern analysis has confirmed that the new text appears using ink compositions identical to the originals, despite the fact that many of these ink formulations are no longer known to modern chemistry. Paper dating techniques show that fresh text appears on centuries-old parchment without any signs of recent addition or chemical treatment. The monastery has maintained detailed records of the phenomenon for over 400 years. The rate of new text generation appears to follow mysterious cycles, sometimes producing dozens of new pages in a single night, then remaining dormant for months or even years. Attempts to remove the affected books from the library result in the immediate cessation of new text generation, but returning them to their original locations causes the phenomenon to resume within days. Vatican investigators have examined the collection multiple times over the centuries, always concluding that no fraud or natural explanation can account for what they've observed. The Catholic Church has classified the Bibliotheca Phantasmagorica as a theological anomaly requiring further study, effectively placing it under permanent ecclesiastical investigation. Perhaps most unnerving of all, recent additions to the books have begun referencing contemporary events and technologies that no medieval scribe could possibly have known about. One 14th century alchemical text recently added a chapter describing nuclear fusion with scientific accuracy that rivals modern textbooks. Another manuscript about herbalism has started including treatments for diseases that weren't identified until the 20th century. Mystery number 8. The Clockwork Monastery. High in the Swiss Alps stands the abandoned monastery of St. Kronos, a religious community that vanished in 1847 under circumstances that still perplex investigators today. What makes this disappearance truly extraordinary isn't just that an entire monastic order vanished without explanation, but that they left behind the most sophisticated mechanical devices ever discovered from the pre-industrial era. The monastery was home to the Temporal Brotherhood, an obscure religious order that believed time itself was a divine creation requiring careful study and protection. For 3 centuries, these monks dedicated themselves to creating increasingly complex clockwork mechanisms, supposedly to better understand God's design of temporal reality. When Swiss authorities finally investigated the abandoned monastery, they discovered workshop after workshop filled with mechanical marvels that shouldn't have been possible with medieval technology. Clockwork automatons that could perform complex mathematical calculations, mechanical calendars that accurately predicted eclipses centuries in advance, and most remarkably, a room-sized device that appeared to be some sort of temporal measurement apparatus. The craftsmanship displayed in these devices defies everything we know about pre-industrial engineering capabilities. Gears were cut with precision that rivals modern manufacturing. Springs were tempered using metallurgical techniques that weren't developed until the 20th century. And the overall complexity of the mechanism suggests knowledge of physics principles that weren't formally discovered for generations. Most puzzling of all was the discovery of what the monks called their Kronos engine, a massive clockwork contraption that filled an entire underground chamber. The device was still running when investigators found it, despite having no visible power source and showing no signs of wear after decades of continuous operation. The mechanism produces a rhythmic pulse that seems to synchronize with cosmic phenomena, speeding up during solar flares and slowing down during lunar eclipses. Contemporary accounts from the final years of the monastery describe increasingly strange behavior among the brothers. Local villagers reported seeing monks walking backwards through the village, speaking in reverse, and performing their daily routines in temporal sequences that made no logical sense. Some witnesses claimed the monks seemed to be aging backwards, with elderly brothers gradually becoming younger while novices appeared to grow ancient overnight. The monastery's final records, written in the peculiar reverse script that the brothers developed in their later years, speak of achieving their ultimate goal of stepping outside the flow of divine time. The last entry, dated 3 days before the community vanished, simply reads, "We have found the door. Tomorrow we walk backwards into yesterday." Modern analysis of the abandoned clockwork devices has revealed engineering principles that contemporary science still struggles to explain. Several universities have attempted to reproduce the monk's work, but every attempt has resulted in mechanical failure within hours of activation. The original devices continue to operate flawlessly, as if powered by some unknown force that modern engineering cannot replicate. Mystery number 9, the Surgeon of Shadows. In the medical archives of Edinburgh's Royal College of Physicians lies a collection of case studies that has baffled doctors for over 2 centuries. Between 1798 and 1823, a mysterious figure known only as the Surgeon of Shadows performed medical procedures throughout Scotland that were so advanced they seemed to come from another era entirely. Patients who encountered this enigmatic physician reported experiences that sound more like science fiction than historical medicine. The surgeon appeared only at night, always wearing a distinctive mask that completely obscured his features. He carried medical instruments unlike anything other doctors had ever seen. Devices that seemed to operate using principles that wouldn't be discovered for decades. The documented cases read like impossibilities. A young woman with a severe spinal injury was reportedly cured overnight using a procedure that involved no visible surgical intervention. A child born with a fatal heart defect was treated with what witnesses described as a device that sang to the heart, after which the defect completely vanished. Most remarkably, several patients reported that their treatments involved the surgeon somehow reaching into their bodies without making any incisions, manipulating their internal organs with his bare hands. What makes these accounts particularly credible is that they were documented by respected physicians of the era, men whose reputations depended on their adherence to scientific principles. Dr. Malcolm Sinclair, the Royal College's most prominent surgeon, personally witnessed 3 procedures performed by the mysterious figure and wrote detailed descriptions that still exist in the archives. According to Dr. Sinclair's notes, the Surgeon of Shadows possessed knowledge of human anatomy that far exceeded anything taught in medical schools of the time. He could identify internal conditions without examination, predict the progression of diseases with perfect accuracy, and perform procedures that left patients completely healed without any signs of surgical intervention. The medical instruments used by this mysterious figure have never been adequately explained. Witnesses described devices that glowed with their own light, instruments that seemed to move on their own, and tools that produced sounds unlike anything in the medical arsenal of the period. One recurring description mentions a device that looked like a silver wand, but could apparently see through human skin and bone to examine internal organs. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Surgeon of Shadows seemed to possess detailed knowledge of medical conditions that wouldn't be formally identified until the 20th century. He successfully treated what modern doctors recognize as genetic disorders, autoimmune diseases, and neurological conditions that 18th century medicine couldn't even diagnose, let alone cure. The mysterious physician's appearances abruptly ceased in 1823, coinciding with a series of unusual astronomical events that included several meteor showers and an unusually bright aurora that was visible as far south as London. The last documented encounter occurred during a particularly intense display of northern lights, with witnesses reporting that the surgeon seemed to dissolve into the aurora itself. Mystery number 10, the cartographer's paradox. Our final mystery takes us into the realm of impossible geography, where maps themselves become the puzzle. In 1889, the estate of deceased cartographer Edmund Blackwood donated his private collection to the Royal Geographic Society in London. Among his papers was a series of extraordinarily detailed maps depicting regions of the world that, according to all other sources, simply don't exist. These weren't fantastical maps of imaginary lands or artistic interpretations of unexplored territories. Blackwood's impossible chart showed precise topographical details, complete with elevation markers, river systems, and coastal features rendered with the accuracy of modern surveying techniques. The problem was that these detailed landscapes occupied spaces on Earth where other maps showed only empty ocean or well-documented landmasses. What makes Blackwood's maps truly extraordinary is their internal consistency and scientific accuracy. The river systems follow logical drainage patterns. The mountain ranges show proper geological formation, and the coastal erosion patterns match what would be expected from centuries of natural weathering. These aren't the products of imagination, but appear to be precise surveys of real places that somehow exist in a parallel version of our world. The Royal Geographic Society initially dismissed the maps as elaborate hoaxes or artistic exercises, but closer examination revealed troubling details. Several of Blackwood's impossible islands contained place names in languages that didn't exist in any known linguistic family. The vegetation patterns shown on his charts described ecosystems that followed biological rules but contained species that had never been catalogued by natural science. Most disturbing of all, subsequent expeditions to the locations shown on Blackwood's maps occasionally reported brief glimpses of the impossible landscapes. Ships would encounter fog banks in areas where his charts showed mysterious islands, and for moments crews would swear they could see coastlines that shouldn't exist before the mist cleared to reveal empty ocean once again. Modern satellite imagery has confirmed that nothing exists in the locations Blackwood mapped, yet GPS anomalies in these areas continue to puzzle navigation experts. Ships and aircraft report temporary instrument malfunctions when passing through the coordinates, and several vessels have radioed descriptions of landmasses that vanish from their screens within minutes. Blackwood's personal journals, discovered decades after the initial donation, provide even more questions than answers. His final entries describe a lifetime spent mapping the spaces between spaces, territories that exist in the margins of reality itself. His last written words speak of finally preparing to visit these impossible places in person, to walk the shores of islands that exist only in the spaces where different versions of the world briefly touch. The cartographer's paradox represents perhaps the most profound mystery on our list, challenging not just our understanding of history, but our conception of reality itself. These maps suggest that the world might be far stranger and more complex than we've ever imagined, with entire landscapes existing just beyond the edge of ordinary perception. As we've journeyed through these 10 hidden mysteries, we've encountered puzzles that span centuries and continents, each one challenging our assumptions about what's possible in our world. But these are just the tip of an enormous iceberg of forgotten enigmas that continue to perplex researchers and investigators around the globe. The truth is, these 10 mysteries represent just a fraction of history's hidden puzzles. For every enigma we've explored tonight, there are dozens more waiting in dusty archives and forgotten corners of the world. Ancient civilizations that vanished without explanation. Technologies that shouldn't have existed. People who stepped out of their normal lives and into legend. leaving behind only questions that echo through the centuries. What strikes me most about these cases is how they've managed to stay hidden from mainstream attention. While everyone debates the same familiar mysteries, these profound puzzles remain virtually unknown, studied only by small circles of dedicated researchers who've devoted their careers to chasing answers that may never come. But here's what's truly fascinating. Each of these mysteries shares common threads that suggest they might not be isolated incidents at all. The recurring themes of impossible technologies, mass disappearances, and phenomena that seem to bend the rules of reality itself paint a picture of a world far stranger than our history books would have us believe. Consider how many of these cases involve groups of people who seem to possess knowledge or capabilities that were centuries ahead of their time. The monks who created clockwork devices that modern engineers can't replicate. The mysterious surgeon who performed procedures that wouldn't be possible until the development of modern medical technology. The cartographer who mapped places that exist in the spaces between reality. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that if these 10 mysteries have remained hidden for so long, how many others are still waiting to be discovered? How many impossible artifacts lie buried in museum storage rooms, labeled as hoaxes because they don't fit our understanding of history? How many eyewitness accounts have been dismissed as folklore when they might actually be glimpses into a reality far more mysterious than we've ever dared to imagine? These aren't just historical curiosities or academic puzzles. They're windows into the possibility that our world operates according to rules we haven't even begun to comprehend. And if you've made it this far, you're now part of that small group of people who know about mysteries that most of humanity will never encounter. The question isn't whether these puzzles will ever be solved. The question is what other impossible secrets are still out there, waiting in the shadows of history for someone brave enough to seek them out.